Hello and welcome to the Agtually podcast, where we learn about farming and food from the people who actually grow and process it. I'm your host, Sheridan. Join me as I learn as much as I possibly can about agriculture and food production. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Denton Ross has agreed to sit down with me and talk about his family's farm. Denton is a fifth-generation farmer here in Arizona who works closely with his whole family running their dairy, ranch, and crop farm. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I know you're very busy, but will you please give us an overview of your background and your family's involvement in agriculture?
Yeah, so I think you stated it there, fifth generation farmer in Arizona, grew up on the east side of Phoenix on the family farm, started working as soon as I got out of high school, just went to work on the farm and just been involved in kind of every aspect of our family's row crop operation, feedlot, dairy, from the very beginning, and just kind of grew up doing it, and it's what I've always done and still doing it today.
Mm-hmm. So when did what year did your family move to Arizona and start?
So I always say, and I don't know, my mom always says, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, but my story's always been we broke down here in the Depression, and I think that's partly true. I had my grandpa, my mom's father, was born, his oldest brother was born in Gilbert, where we eventually started farming. He was born back in Grimes, Oklahoma, so they broke in Gilbert once, went back to Oklahoma, then he was born. Then they went to California where his sister was born, my great aunt, but then they eventually made it back to Gilbert, where they settled on 40 acres, and then Grandpa bought another 40, and then they bought another 80 on back taxes, and kind of started piecing the farm together.
Okay. So the reason I asked you to do this interview is because your family farm is not what most would think of when they think of a family farm. Generally, they picture a red barn and some pasture land and a couple tractors. But can you share with us the scope of your family's farm?
Yeah, so currently, as it sits today, my family farms about 6,200 acres near Gila Bend, Arizona, southwest Phoenix, and we milk about 3,200 cows. We feed all of our offspring of our dairy animals all the way to fat. So we have about 1,500 head on feed currently. And then we have a cow operation in northern Arizona where we have about 500 mama cows, and we raise the calves off of those every year.
Okay. So when you said the 1,500 to feed, that's to raise for beef or for milk?
Those are all beef animals. Okay. All the replacements are here as well. So there's, the dairy. We milk 3,200. There's about 6,000 animals on site for replacements for the dairy herd, but then there's an additional 1,500 animals, most of the male offspring from the dairy herd that we feed in the Panhandle of Texas.
Okay, and then you said you have pairs up in up the north, and that's for beef as well?
Yep, all those are beef cows, and they have calves hopefully every year. That's the goal. They have a calf every year, and then those calves get weaned off their moms, and then they end up in the feedlot.
Okay, all right. So most people would consider this farm a factory farm just by the size of it. And I looked it up, and the first definition that I found was, quote, a large industrialized farm, especially a farm on which a large number of livestock are raised indoors in conditions intended to maximize production and at minimal cost. Does this describe your farm? Why not?
To some degree. I mean, we don't do anything indoors in Arizona because of the heat. I know they do that a lot in the Midwest where it's cold. They have to keep them inside, but here we don't have to keep them inside, and so they're outside. It is large in the sense I think that most people would think of as large. As far as dairy farms go in Arizona, it's not considered large anymore. It's funny because when we started in the dairy business in '73, that was before I was born, but cotton was kind of our thing, and we grew a lot of cotton, and then we started in the dairy business, and when my grandpa and his partner at the time, they started acquiring small dairies and did make it large. Back then, nobody had large dairies, and then in 1980, they doubled the size of their dairy, and they were actually milking 5,000 cows at the time, which was kind of unheard of. That was really, really large. But from the standpoint of efficiencies, it was much better. It was much had much purchasing power on the feed and had it just more efficient with the animals and all those things. So I always kind of joke that we were kind of large dairy before large dairy was cool. But now the common dairy size is about 10,000 cows. So our dairy is actually kind of small in comparison. But I would see how most people would consider it a large operation.
Okay. The second part of that definition, it said intended to maximize production at minimal cost. But is it not true that all businesses would want to maximize production at minimal cost?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at maximizing production, whether that be an acre of farm ground or getting the most of milk out of a cow, yeah, we try to do that. Of course, why wouldn't we, right? Why wouldn't we try to maximize efficiency, maximize what we can get out of a cow? Now, when I say that, that may sound like harsh to the animal, but it's actually kind of the complete opposite, because the happiest, healthiest cows will give you the most. So we always just try to make our crop ground happy and healthy, our cows happy and healthy, and that makes for the most efficient use of land and cows.
Okay. The USDA in 2020 recorded this statistic, and it's kind of a big quote, so I'm going to quote the whole thing right now. Our research found that family farms remain a key part of U.S. agriculture, making up 98% of all farms and providing 88% of production. Most farms are small family farms, and they operate almost half of the U.S. farmland while generating 21% of production. Mid-size and large-scale family farms account for about 66% of production, and non-family farms represent the remaining 2.1% of farms and 12% of production. Likewise, according to a census of agriculture in 2022, so this is a different research apart from the USDA, they said large-scale farms, so 5,000 acres or more, which is your farm, account for only 2% of the farms in America. However, this 2% farms almost half, 42%, of all the farmland in America. So according to this, it's safe to say that large-scale family farms are important to farming, the economy, and just food production in general. But a lot of people believe that these large farms aren't sustainable to the environment, that they make a huge impact on the land and nutritional value of the products and on the health and well-being of animals. What are your thoughts on this? Is it right to be concerned?
First off, yes, absolutely, it's right to be concerned about the environment and right to be concerned about how other people are treating the environment. But just because something is over a large amount of acres doesn't mean it's bad inherently for the environment, right? It wouldn't matter if you were dumping pollutants on a quarter acre of ground in your backyard in some subdivision in Phoenix, or if I was doing it on thousands of acres. The result still, that's not good for the environment. That's not healthy. And whenever I get questions about environmental concerns over farms, I can't speak to all of agriculture, right? I can speak to what happens on our farms and what I've seen happen through 5 generations on our farm. We have to care for the ground because the ground is what cares for us. Like, it's important for us to be conservationists. I think we're the first conservationists. Like, we've always been conservationists from the very beginning. From when we started the cow ranch up north, from my grandpa going out with the Forest Service and creating water drinkages for cattle, yes, but also all the wildlife use those as well, for creating fences in such a way that is beneficial to the wildlife and the cattle. And to, the use of the farm ground, to before even the dairy came about, when we were farming, we have to make sure that the farm is going to be productive for generations to come, right? I'm the 5th generation. I have the 6th working on the farm, and the 7th has started. So they're coming, right? And I have to, if I'm being a good steward of what God has provided my family, then I have to ensure that that's going to be usable for that 7th generation, which is up and coming right now.
What are some practices that you employ to care for the environment while still being able to produce on a large scale? And I'm thinking specifically about like crops.
So on the crop side, things that we do for the environment, obviously, whenever we apply anything, whether that be commercial fertilizer or manure from the dairy or even herbicide or pesticides, obviously we're staying, maybe not obviously, we always stay within state regulation, within the from federal regulation and FDA of how the product is labeled to whatever the state requires for PPEs, for personal protective equipment, and all those different things. And then, we adhere to the standard of the entry intervals and the post-harvest intervals for any chemical that we do use on crops, because sometimes we do use chemicals. I mean, we're not a organic farm, so we do use commercial fertilizers and chemicals to control insects or various weeds on the farm, but we use them in a way that is regulated and able to be sustainable on the farm.
Okay, so you were saying that there's you could put the chemical on, but then there's a time between when it was applied and when you can harvest?
Yeah, so every chemical there's kind of two numbers that we look at, and I do that on the daily on a water sheet. If we have applied chemical to a field, there's a little indicator that comes red that says okay, and it's the entry REI re-entry interval. So like, okay, if we spray a chemical on this field, then the re-entry, nobody can enter into the field without PPEs, without personal protective equipment. And most of the chemicals we use, the personal protective equipment, is like boots that I'm wearing and pants. It's not like what you see, like, remember E.T., remember the bubble, the people in the suits, the hazmat suits or anything? It's not like that. None of the chemicals we use require that, but you can't enter the field, and usually those range from, like the one I did last week was 4 hours and sometimes up to 12 hours. So then past that, then the chemical has done its course and it's not able to be picked up. And then there's the PHI, or the post-harvest interval. So that means that we can't harvest the crop after a certain amount of days, and that usually will be extended more than the REI. So it would be, usually it's some of them are up to like 1 day, but most of them are like probably 7 days. So then after 7 days, then it's safe to harvest to use as animal feed or people feed, and all those numbers are again federally regulated, and the chemical manufacturers have to prove that, okay, this is where that's at, and then the federal government puts their stamp on to say, okay, this is the proper use of that chemical.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So moving now to the animals, what are some practices that you employ to improve your animals' quality of life?
Oh man, that's like what all we do for dairy cows is improve their quality of life. Because again, a dairy cow, if she's happy and healthy, that's when she's going to give the most milk and be the most productive for the longest period of time. So from the standpoint of animal care, as far as once she becomes a milk cow, every day she goes into the barn 3 times a day to get milked. And they love getting milked. They love going into the barn for several reasons. There's extra cooling in the barn, and there's extra rubber padding that they like to stand on. And they get a bath every time they go in there. So we wash them off and soak them down and get them cooled in the summertime. They get cooled, and then they go in and get milked, and then they come out of the barn. And while they were in the barn, then we're busy in the pen creating bedding for them. So we in Arizona, we're fortunate enough to be able to use manure as bedding, and manure actually is one of the best beddings if it's dry. And that's the key with Arizona, it being as dry as it is, we can use manure. So we scrape out all the wet manure and put it out in a windrow to dry, and then we bring in all the dry manure. And so basically what you want for cow bedding is you want to be able to just stand up and drop to your knees and it not hurt. Like, I wouldn't do that on the concrete, wouldn't recommend it. That would probably hurt, right? Mm-hmm. But if you go out to our pens that have been manicured and bedded properly, you'll sink down probably a foot deep in nice soft manure, and they love to lay on it. So they come out of the barn, there's fresh feed waiting for them, they eat, and then they go and lay down, and then they make milk, and they're happy. So and then that process repeats itself 3 times a day, and the cows that are thriving, which that's all of our cows, they love it.
Are there specialists that you consult to ensure that you're taking the best care of your animals?
Yeah, so we have a nutritionist that is balancing the ration. I mean, he's on site monthly, but we probably talk to him on average 2 or 3 times a week. And so the nutrition is balanced to a T. Like, they get exact nutrients that is required for their how much milk they're making and reproductive requirements. So like the nutrition, you know, imagine like the Olympics are going on right now. So like those athletes are getting the perfect nutrition for whatever they're participating in, right? So our cows get the perfect nutrition for whatever they're participating in. If they're currently lactating, and they're making lots of milk, they get a certain diet. If they're pregnant, then that diet changes, right? Often when women get pregnant today, their dietary needs and vitamins and different things change, so that changes. And then there's a period where they quit making milk for a little bit of time when they're dry and they're getting ready to have that baby. Then again, requirements change, so the ration changes there. And that goes all the way through from when they're born all the way up to the lactation. There's, you know, I think probably 8 off the top of my head, 8 to 10 different rations on the dairy that we feed depending on life cycle and all those different things. So that's balanced. We have a vet on site 2 to 3 times a week that is doing, you know, preg checks, which animals are pregnant, and then doing basic, you know, animal welfare type calls on bedding, on cooling, on misters or soaker lines or whatever it may be to, again, just to ensure that our cows are happy.
Okay. What about for the farm?
So on the farm, we utilize, the farms are kind of broken out in 2 different areas, and we utilize kind of 2 different people in those areas as far as specialists are concerned, like agronomists that are out there on the farm, depending on the growing season, 3 times a week or maybe once every couple weeks. Like in the winter, things slow down, you don't have to be out there as much. But in that time frame, they're assessing for pests, assessing for that be bugs or weeds, assessing for just how the crop looks physically, like go out there and lay your eyes on it, right? And then we would, depending on the type of year and the different crop, we would take soil samples to ensure that the nutrients are balanced for the crop, and then we would take petiole samples of the plant itself to make sure that the plants are healthy and thriving. And so we use agronomists in that regard, and I guess that's probably the only specialist that we use on the farm. And of course, you know, we're out there every day, like me or my brother or my son, whoever it may be, we're out looking at those things every day as well, looking at the crop every day and making sure that everything's going good. Okay.
So what about employees? Because just because you have certain rules and practices, that doesn't mean everybody will follow them, right? So how do you ensure that everyone you employ is following according to what you guys decide?
Yeah, we have across all of our entities 50 plus employees, probably like 55, 60. I think it's under 60, but right in that area. And on the crop side, they have some basic training requirements when it comes to those REIs and pH. I like the re-entry intervals and post-harvest intervals. Like everybody's equipped to some degree on chemicals, even if there's only one guy on the farm that handles the chemicals, but all of them have to be equipped to a certain degree because we use them, right? And then on the dairy, we use Dairy Kind, which is a series of different videos that are required for any new employee on the dairy, and they go over animal husbandry practices, animal handling practices, break times, all those different things to ensure that the animals are being treated how they're supposed to be treated, and that our workers are in a situation that is going to be successful for them as well.
Have you ever caught employees, mishandling animals or something?
It does happen occasionally, and there is a zero tolerance policy if it comes down to mishandling an animal. And if anybody's worked with animals long enough, you've been in situations where you get frustrated. If anybody's had kids for long enough, you've been around a kid and trying to get it to do something, it can get frustrating sometimes. But we have to just be vigilant when it comes to the care and how we handle animals, no matter how frustrated we are. And so to say that it's never happened on our farm, that wouldn't be true. But it has happened, and again, we have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to use of. There's certain things that, and it's in the required viewing that they see. Like if this gets seen one time, that's it. There's no second chance. There's no, hey, what was going on here? It's like, nope, that's it. They can no longer work here. And then there's certain things that would be, okay, hey, let's not yell at the animals. As we don't yell, we don't make loud noises. If you're working animals properly, they kind of work themselves, so to speak. But again, you get sick animals. You get animals that feel like they're trapped but maybe aren't, and then react different. So there's just different things that can come up. But there's certain things that are zero tolerance, and there's certain things like if it is yelling or something to that regard, okay, no animal's being hurt here in the moment, but we do need to sit down, talk, why we don't do that. And it's not, hey, stop doing that. It's, hey, here's why we don't do that. Because this isn't what's best for the animal, and it's not going to help you in the long run. And so what's going to be best for the animal is going to be, in turn, going to be best for the employee. So.
Okay. What about on the farm, like specifically with the chemicals? Have you ever caught, you said only one person applies them, but have you ever caught them doing anything, like abusing the chemicals, using too much?
No, I don't, not to my knowledge has that ever happened.
Okay, well, good.
No, I don't think so.
So you've traveled around the country quite a bit and toured quite a few farms. So do the majority of large-scale farms that you have witnessed share your same values and practices?
Yeah, everyone that I've been on has, and I haven't been. I guess I have traveled. We have some cows in Wisconsin, so we've been there. Been to the Panhandle of Texas quite a bit, and Pennsylvania. Just trying to think, Utah, the places that I've been on. For Idaho, been on farms, and every farm that I've been on, and most of those are probably fit in the category of large scale. All of them that I've been on would kind of reiterate the same things I'm saying, where it's like, look, we have to take care of these animals, and we have to take care of this ground, because that's what takes care of us. So it just makes no sense to me to think that any farm would be out there trying to be destructive of the environment, because we make our living off the environment. People say, well, we live off the environment. Yeah, but this is how our livelihood, this is our life. And so why would we try to destroy, that very thing that gives us life? So every farm that I've ever been on, they would kind of adhere to that same principle.
Okay. I'm going to go kind of back to the farm. So do you guys practice crop rotation? And the majority of farms that you've been on, do they also practice crop rotation?
Yeah, you almost have to. I'm trying to think of if I've been on a farm that didn't practice crop rotation. I mean, for most of America, it's corn and beans. It's soybeans and then corn, and which makes a really nice rotation for the ground, because one's a legume, one's a monocot, and that really one depletes the soil of one thing and adds the soil, and the other one it's conversing, so it works really well. And for here, specifically, we don't grow soybeans. There's a shatter issue, but we grow corn, and the good rotation with that is alfalfa. So yeah, we are constantly rotating between alfalfa and corn, or wheat and alfalfa, or we haven't grown cotton in quite some time, but cotton was another one that was a good rotational crop. But yeah, it's for soil health, for fertility of the crop, for the, again, if you were to grow corn on corn on corn, it depletes the soil of certain things, and it would cost a lot to add that soil back. It comes back to a cost thing, right? It wouldn't be cost effective to not rotate your crops. And so it makes the most sense to just keep that rotation, and you hope that there's 2 or 3 crops that are economically viable. And sometimes you do grow crops that aren't economically viable just for that sense. Like, well, I'm not gonna maybe make any money on this, but it's time to rotate this in for soil fertility. Again, we have to take care of the soil, because that's what's taking care of us.
Okay. Do you ever let your ground fallow? Just let it sit?
We will for certain times. The best, I think to me, this is maybe personal preference, but there is some science behind it. But it's good to open up ground. Where it's like we do a lot of vertical tillage where we're not really turning soil over, but we're kind of tilling the soil vertically, and it kind of opens up and aerates the soil. You've probably seen, maybe you've seen on like golf courses where they aerate and they have all those little plugs of ground where they're just trying to get air and vibrancy into the soil. So we do that same kind of thing. And I like to do that on crops for, a certain period of time where it's just open and aired up, and the ground becomes more mellow. Again, it's good for the soil. So the ground becomes more mellow, which makes for better planting conditions for the next crop.
Okay. And what about cover crops? I've heard talk of cover crops, but can you explain just a little bit what they are?
Not widely used in Arizona farming. I've seen them a few times in alfalfa, and so and it depends on how they're being used. They do a lot of winter cover crops in different areas. I've seen more in Arizona where they say like green manure, so they'll grow a crop just to put it back into the soil. Because on certain number of our crops, like corn, for instance, here we grow silage corn almost exclusively in Arizona. There's very little grain corn. Most other places in the country, they grow grain corn. So they take just the kernels of grain, but that whole stalk goes back into the ground. Or we take that whole stalk. So we're taking quite a bit of nutrients from the ground or from the plant that's growing in the ground. And so we're taking maybe 10 tons per acre, dry tons per acre of things out of the ground. So we have to add stuff. Back to the ground. And sometimes you can grow like a cover crop and basically turn that just right back into the ground. So it again, just to promote soil fertility and soil, to make the ground better for the next crop.
So that's like an investment. You wouldn't make anything on that crop, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an investment into the ground. Yeah, it's not going to return money on that crop, but you're hoping that it returns in the long run, right?
Okay.
It's always a long-term play on a farm, a dairy. We're never looking at just 1 year. Again, I'm looking to the 7th generation, right? And I have to make sure that we're set up that way, that goes that way, so we can't deplete the soil of nutrients. We're talking about water. Arizona, that's a big issue, but like using too much water, all those things, we have to make sure that we're set up to be here for the long haul.
Okay. Let's talk about water just a little bit. So here, that's a big deal here in Arizona.
Here we go.
But what are some things that you can do to cut down on water, but still, I mean, you need water. So
you have to irrigate in Arizona. I mean, we get 3.5 inches average here. So, I mean, not enough to grow any crops. And so we use water. In one of our farms, it's all from an irrigation district. In another farm, it's all pump water from the ground. We're on a river, but we're pumping from the ground. So it's but in each of those cases, we're kind of monitoring how those wells are doing over time. Like we've been on that farm now for 20 years, I think 20 years. And so like wells go down and we have to replace wells here and there. And so we're always looking at what's the static water level, how we're doing in regards to the groundwater, and just to make sure that we have enough groundwater there. And then we're always looking for ways to conserve water, whether that be efficiencies in irrigation or efficiencies in different crops, maybe not totally different crops, but different traits and different varieties of the same crop. Like there might be a corn crop that's a little more drought tolerant that we could use less water on. And recently we've installed, quite a few acres of different irrigation systems, whether that be a linear sprinkler irrigation system or pivot sprinkler irrigation system. And too new to give you any hard numbers right now, but I can tell you that we use significantly less water on this corn crop this year. The yields weren't quite what we wanted this year, but again, too new. This is our first time doing it, so we're learning as we go, but I think we're going to be able to improve our efficiency on water usage by a minimum of 15%, and I'm hoping it's more like 25 or 30.
Okay.
But let's talk next year.
Okay. What about like for flood irrigation? What are some things you can do to make that more efficient?
So flood irrigation efficiencies come with proper management. So like to be able to run the less amount of tailwater out of the field as possible, you need to have your employees trained and equipped to be able to move the water in a way that doesn't create that flood water. Like when you're flooding a basin, right, and you're waiting for that water to come out, you don't shut the water off when the water starts coming out. You can shut that water off maybe 30 steps, and depending on the field, maybe 50 steps. There were some fields when I was irrigating as a kid in Gilbert, I'd shut them off 150 steps from the bottom, and then you just wait, and then if it makes it out, you're like, oh, that's perfect, because then it didn't run any water, and then now we're using all the water on the crop versus, and then all the water when it does leave, so that you don't want the water to leave the field because you're paying for the water no matter what. But once it leaves, all of our farms, it catches that water again and we reuse that water. So it's not like it's a total loss. It's just you're charging that crop for that water and it's going somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you feed your cows directly from the crops that you grow, or do you have to supplement?
So all the forage pretty much.
And what's the forage?
All the forage comes to the cows. The forage would be I always like to look at the forage as the forage is like the keg and the other ingredients are like the shot glass. So like the majority of the feed is what we feed as forage. So that would be corn silage, not corn in the sense of like corn on the cob, but like the whole plant chopped up, and a lot of hay. And then we feed ryegrass would be considered, and then we feed a triticale, which is similar to like a wheat, but it's not the grain. Again, it's more the grass area, which is similar to rye. And then we feed some sorghum. Again, not the grain part, just the plant itself. Okay. And then the other stuff would be corn. We feed ground corn to cows, and then we supplement depending on the market. So like if something comes in and it's inexpensive and it's cheaper to feed a little more protein because the ration is balanced perfectly with the exact right amount of protein, of energy, carbohydrates, all those things. It's balanced perfectly, and so we might add in like a little soybean meal or a little just to give them the right amount of protein. But it's small amounts, again, just to get that perfect balance of diet.
Okay, so the majority of the forage comes from your farm.
Yeah, comes from the farm. Yep. So like the it's probably 80 to 90% of the ration comes from our farm.
Okay. What about like minerals and stuff? Do you give the cows?
Yeah. So again, there's we have I think 5 different mineral packs off the top of my head that would be different ages and different stages of lactation for animals. That it's a balanced thing. In fact, I don't even exactly know it. I know what ingredients are in it. I don't know to what amount because that's kind of the nutritionist trade secret, right? But it's all like stuff like vitamin A, vitamin D, selenium, all those little trace minerals that that are important. Like, you know, we need copper, we need sodium, we need a certain amount of salt, and you don't want to add a lot of those because they're very expensive, but you want your cows to be healthy, right? So basically they get like a Flintstone vitamin ground up in their feed and fed to them every day.
They sound healthier than me.
Sometimes I envy them to have a nice prepared balanced meal every day. I mean, it's the same thing every day, but I can tell you they love it because they eat a lot of it.
How much do they eat?
Oh man, our high strings are probably pushing dry matter. They're probably pushing 65 to on the upper end 70 pounds of feed a day.
Wow, each one?
Yeah. But they're giving. This is always incredible to me. So those high strings will be giving 110 pounds of milk. They're eating 70 pounds, but giving us 110 pounds back.
What about water? How much?
They drink a lot of water and milk's mostly water, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how they can do that efficiently. But yeah, they drink. I don't know what a cow. They probably drink 20 gallons a day. Maybe you have to edit this out. I have to blurb in what my nutritionist says.
I think Justin said 75 pounds.
75 pounds.
75 gallons of water.
Oh, I mean that could be
the high producing milk cows.
When you see them go up to a big nice cow, go up to a water trough and just, you're like, they drink a lot.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss? Any misconceptions that you want to clear up?
No, I mean, I like where you're kind of headed with this, to just let people know that, just because something is of a certain size doesn't necessarily mean that it's evil, right? Just because somebody milks 10 cows doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing it properly. I'm sure there's some small family farms that probably could use some help in animal husbandry, and I'm sure there's some large farms in the same way. But there's large farms that are, and I think we're one of them, that we're doing the best that we can do to take care of the cows, doing the best that we can do to take care of the ground, again, because that's what's taking care of us. And I plan on that taking care of not only me, but of my generation and my grandkids and my great-grandkids, and however long they want to take that to go. I hope it's around to do that for not only them, but I mean, we're trying to feed the world here.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.